We're going to start off this chapter as it's all dedicated to copy and text. We're going to start by taking a deeper look into bilingual and really bidirectional languages such as Hebrew and Arabic, which enable you to combine both Arabic and Hebrew in it. So most Arabic and Hebrew, well, not most, but Arabic and Hebrew, both combine a lot of times English into them, creating a plethora of issues. Now, this might not be important to you, so you could basically skip it if you'll never work with multilingual website application building. But if there's a chance you would, it is so important you watch this. Even if you'll never actually do it, you'll remember about it. So in the future, if you ever need to do it, you could refer back to it. So let's jump right into it. It's going to be the only lecture about language. And right after that, we're going to start working on the worldwide text-related things. So let's jump right into it. To be able to start this sample, we're going to need a bi-directional copy inside of our paragraph. To do that, I'm just going to go to Google Translate, and what I'm just going to do is just have on one side English or whatever your native language is, and on the other side a language that is not left to right but right to left, such as Hebrew or Arabic. So I'm going to go ahead here and just write here, cats don't like dogs. Now, you could write whatever sentence. Really, the point is just to create a sentence. I'm going to go ahead here and just copy it by copying it. And I'll go right into my editor and just go into a paragraph. And a little bit before the break of the line, I'm just going to, where the line breaks, I'm going to add some copy and put a space there and save. Now, I want you to notice something. Notice how the copy here is written upside down. Well, in our browser, when we were looking at it, this copy is not written in the same way. So if we just take a look at the two together, one next to each other, notice how, I'll just set it, notice how it's actually written exactly the opposite, because we're really in an editor that is an English-speaking editor. And by adding copy that is not in English, it doesn't really know what to do with it. So it's just adding it into the paragraph in the most natural way that it knows how to. But that doesn't mean that that is how the browser would render it. If we go now into the browser, just opening it up again, notice how it's going to actually by default render. So notice how we have here cats, well, basically it's reading your cats don't like dogs, and it's broken down into two lines. But are these two lines reading the copy phonetically correctly? And they are. So we can see that here they're upside down, but here they're not upside down. All the rules that govern how to do these stuff are happening automatically, which for the most part in a modern web experience, you really don't have to worry too much about the alignment. The only question here is our copy really, do we really want our copy to be aligned from left to right in general? Or do we want our copy to be aligned from right to left or left to right? In this case, the sentence begins here and it continues on, then continues from this direction here, and then from here to the end here, and then going back all the way to this direction, which is intuitive and natural if you speak both languages and reading a paragraph that is mainly in English. But if the paragraph was mainly in Hebrew and there was some English in it, we would expect the paragraph to actually start really the other way around. Now, in those scenarios, you would go into your editor, and I'm just going to go into this paragraph and just add to it a class. I'm just going to call this class multi-language. And for this multi-language class, I'm just going to go ahead here and save it, go to my paragraph, and right underneath my article paragraph, I'm just going to add another article p multi. And in this scenario, what do I want to do? I want to go ahead to my direction, and I literally want to say, hey, by the way, your direction is not going to be left to right, which was your default, and we want to turn it to be right to left. Now, by creating this change and setting it to be right to left, which is not the default is just English and languages that go from left to right in general. And if I go ahead here and click on refresh, you'll see that the copy formatting itself is going to be adopted. And let me just make sure that I save it. The copy itself is going to be adopted, and I'm not really seeing here, so let me make sure that I could see that it's actually being implemented, and it's definitely not being implemented. I don't see the multi configured, so let me just go ahead here and just make sure that I've created this multi-law appropriately, and I absolutely did not, because what I wrote here is article. Okay, so we're inside of an article. Then I wrote a paragraph, and inside of that paragraph multi-one, what I really wanted to do is just connect them together, that a multi-paragraph, or just remove the paragraph. So I'll go ahead there and save that and click on refresh. And hopefully this time around, we'll see that our copy is now switched around. And now the layout itself assumes that we're a Hebrew reader. So in this case, we would read in English, move to Hebrew, and so on and so forth. And that is the decision that you want to make between, if you're in a language, for example, that is Arabic or Hebrew, you would want your copy to start from the other direction in general, even though the copy by default would be presented in a readable way. Now, before we complete this topic, I want to go ahead here and just add here into the comment section, just so you could have access to the different options, which we already explored, which was the default, which was left to right. We can turn it to right to left. And if we define it as right to left, for example, in the top of our application in our body, then everything would be right to left because it's automatically inherited unless we decide to convert something specifically to a different format. Now, sometimes you will get copy that will not transcribe correctly. What you would do in those type of cases is really a very, very simple question. Now, by the way, one of the stuff that we want to, by default, the ordering of our words and the decision of what comes before what and what structure it will have is really just based on the normal ordering of our application. Now, if we want, which is basically implicit, it runs behind the scenes and makes the decisions based on that. Now, if we want that direction to change, but to change based on the actual direction we define in the paragraph, we would then set beyond setting a direction, we would also go to something that's called Unicode BD for Bidirectional Copy, and say, what rule do you want to apply to this bidirectional rule? If we're not happy with the normal, which is the default, we could go for the embed option. Now, the embed option is, and it's a little bit hard to see the difference between the embed option and the normal option, but really the big difference between them is not very big. You really want to just test out and see which one works more appropriately for you, and it's really specific, and it's really, in this case, we don't really see a difference between the one and the other because the default and the default rendering and also the embed worked more or less the same exact way in this scenario. Places where you're going to see these type of issues more explicit usually is where you see periods. So if I go ahead and I change my direction now from RTL to back to left to right, I want you to notice that my paragraph, even though it initially has a dot in the end, sometimes, and for example, here we have a comma on this side instead of the side because we're in the Hebrew format. But if we go ahead and click on refresh, notice that our dot is in the right spot, but our dot for our end of the sentence is not in the right spot because it should have been in the end of the sentence, which is this word, klavim. Now, this word should have the dot right after it, but it's not because we are in the LTR, in our embed, we're using an embed and maybe not the normal. So if we set the normal, then we could test it out. And really, this is the matter of playing with it and finding it, especially if you speak those languages, to find the match that would work for you best. And it wouldn't be always 100% perfect. Like in this scenario where the dot is not very explicitly Hebrew or explicitly English. And those are really the places where you have those type of issues most commonly. And unfortunately, you would have to come up with a solution, such as removing the dot or trying to put the dot in a different location. So if we look into this paragraph and we have this dot right here, we might want to test it out by setting it in a different spot. But really, in general, this is a very common issue. You might want to just, instead of that, put there a dash and just separate it with a dash. So there's like a clear separation between the two that is not a dot. And it's really just into your consideration to figure out what would be the format that would work for you best. Now, another way for you to solve this problem is going into your bidirectional pamphlet area there, and instead of saying for it to work in its natural formatting, or instead of telling it to embed, we could give it one more option, and that option would be to have a BD override. Now, which that means is it's a complete override that just follows as if it was all English or left to right or right to left. And in that case, we really would get that language that is completely upside down, but it gives us a lot more control into deciding where would we put that dot, because we could manually just switch it around to the direction that we want it to be. For example, in a case like this, that might work for me because I want it to be something very small. So then I could go ahead there and just copy it the way I want it to be, put it in letter by letter, knowing that there won't be any switch. I'll have complete control over every single character and where it would appear, but that is very problematic, especially in a design that is resizable. If our design was not resizable, then that would probably work perfectly if we wanted to force it in a manual way. Now, you don't have to worry too much about this, nor do you have to memorize it, but it's good to know about it. Now that you know about it, if you ever encounter a situation where you have a need to work with a foreign language that you don't speak, or even a language that you do speak, you'll know what are the points you would want to look for to make sure that your content will be rendered at the most appropriate way. And really, the question here is always a question of how much copy. If it's a really small amount of copy, maybe a BD override would be more fitting than the natural setting. If you have quite a lot of copy, you probably would want to lean on the default or the embed and test to see which one gives you the best result that you can have. So that's it about the language itself. And here on, don't worry, we're back to English and we're back to looking deeply into the different ways that we could control text and present it in different ways on our screen.